Can a parachurch ministry become a church? Should it? In a time where we have evangelistic organizations, worship movements, and deliverance ministries planting churches left and right, we need to ask ourselves this question: who is running these churches, and is this even biblical? Now, most of these churches started with good intentions, but when a parachurch ministry who is designed to run alongside and support the church tries to become the church without proper church governance, without a plurality of elders, without real accountability, then we run into some serious problems. Today we will be discussing the 5 hidden dangers of parachurch ministries planting churches, and what happens when we leave the design that was set in place by Christ and the apostles. This is more than leadership style. This is about protecting God's people, safeguarding against spiritual abuse, and returning to the design of God's church based on what the scriptures teach. Let's go. Now, first, before we begin and dive into the 5 hidden dangers of a parachurch ministry planting a church, we're going to be quickly defining what is a parachurch ministry. Now, a parachurch ministry is a ministry that runs alongside and supports the local church. Usually these ministries are focused on a specific aspect of the role of the church in a way that a local church cannot be. So we have these parachurch ministries, whether they focus on social work or social justice or evangelistic missions, or they focus on counseling or targeting a specific age group, whether that's a college campus, whatever the case may be. These parachurch ministries are good, and they exist and have a role to play within the overall context of how God has called us to preach the gospel and to make disciples. So parachurch ministries run alongside the local church, but they themselves are not the actual church. They are not the local church. Problems usually start when these parachurch ministries go from trying to support the church and running alongside the church to trying to become the local church. Now, God's design is for his church to be the revelation that he chooses to reveal himself through, right? It is the gifts that he's given to the church and the church itself, through which the gospel is proclaimed, and people who come to faith in Christ are discipled, are nurtured, are shepherded, and are sanctified in their walk with God. Now, the parachurch ministry world has its place, but now I think in today's world, we find ourselves in this unique, nuanced situation where we have a lot of parachurch ministries actually planting churches. And the issue and the point of this video is to not go against that specifically. The point of this video is how should a parachurch ministry, if they feel led and if they want to work towards planting a local church, how should a parachurch ministry go about doing that? And I think when they try to do this, there are 5 hidden dangers that they should be conscious of, and Christians should be conscious of whenever we try to dive into this nuanced space between parachurch ministries and planting local churches to further expand the Great Commission and to make disciples. Now, these 5 hidden dangers stem from one main issue or one main challenge that comes up whenever a parachurch ministry tries to plant a local church, and that is the issue of authority and governance. So, whenever you're talking about a parachurch ministry, usually the way that is structured is through a nonprofit structure or a corporate CEO structured, right? It is ran more like a business or a nonprofit than necessarily a church. So we have two different church structures, or we have two different structures when it comes to the way that God has designed his church to be ran and the way that a nonprofit or a business is ran. When parachurch ministries plant churches, the problem is that they usually have the local church become an extension of the parachurch ministry when it should be the other way around. The parachurch ministry should be an extension and should run alongside the local church. Now, when a parachurch ministry plants a local church, it flips that formula on its head. It's the opposite. So now we have the local church actually being an extension or running alongside the parachurch ministry. And I think this dynamic is unbiblical, and it creates some dangers when it comes to how this church is healthy and how this church is structured and how the believers in this church can grow. So we're going to be diving into 5 specific hidden dangers of a parachurch ministry planting a local church, governing that local church, and not disconnecting that local church from its parachurch ministry structure. So let's dive into this 5 hidden dangers, and then later on in the video, if you guys stay with me, I will give you what I think is a proper solution and how we can come to wrestle with the text of Scripture and come up with a solution to have parachurch ministries, if they want, plant a church and it not become problematic. Now, with these 5 hidden dangers, some of these we're going to be spending a little bit more time. Some of these we're just going to be mentioning them. So without further ado, the first hidden danger or pitfall of a parachurch ministry planting a church is something called the founder syndrome. Now, basically what this means is that whenever you have a parachurch ministry, you usually have a CEO or a founder who has established or founded this ministry. It's usually one person that begins the organization or the ministry, the parachurch ministry. And what happens whenever this parachurch ministry now begins or plants a local church is that this founder is now the leader of the local church, and the same way that he is the leader of the parachurch ministry. And I think you run into some problems when you have one leader and you have one person overseeing both. They're overseeing the parachurch and they're overseeing the local church. This CEO type of model or structure, I think, is unbiblical, and it does not line up with the design that God has for his church, which we will be diving into towards the end of the video. Now, from this number 1 pitfall of the founder syndrome, everything else kind of flows out of this one pitfall. So the pitfall number 2, whenever we're dealing with this founder syndrome, is no real biblical accountability. Now, I am not saying that these founders or these nonprofit leaders are necessarily not held accountable. They are. There is a system in place for these nonprofits to be held accountable. Usually, the leader or the CEO or the executive of this nonprofit or this parachurch ministry is usually held accountable by a board of directors or a board of people. Now, the problem is, and the challenge is, and the reason why I say it's an unbiblical accountability is because the accountability that we're supposed to have as leaders is elders who are spirit-filled and biblically qualified. And these boards or these members that are part of the board that are holding the CEO, the executive, the founder accountable, these are not spirit-filled, biblically qualified elders. And I think you run into an issue whenever there is accountability to be enforced. when the people that are enforcing the accountability are not biblically spirit-filled qualified elders. And the reason why I say that there's no biblical accountability is not because there's no accountability, but it is because the accountability that is in place is not reflective of the accountability that God establishes in the scriptures, especially by the apostles. Now, I'm going to give you guys just a couple of verses in scripture that we find that establish what biblical accountability looks like. Acts 14:23, Paul, we see in his first missionary journey, he says that he appointed elders in every single church. A key word there is plural, elders. So there is more than one leader that was appointed in every church. So we see a pattern here that Paul, when he went to preach the gospel and there were now believers that were in these cities, he went ahead, circled back in Acts 14:23, revisited each of these churches and planted and appointed elders. And then we have in Titus 1 verse 5, where Paul tells Titus, hey, appoint elders as I directed you. So we see again, the reason why it's a pattern is because now Paul is telling Titus, hey, appoint elders as I have directed you. I did it when I planted these churches, and I want you to follow the same pattern. So what is biblical accountability? Biblical accountability is a plurality of elders appointed in a church, and these elders are spirit-filled and are biblically qualified. What qualifies you to be an elder? Well, we have 1 Timothy 3 that explains and clarifies, I think it's 15 characteristics of what a biblically qualified elder looks like. And these 15 characteristics are based on the character and the life and the integrity of the leader. It is not based on his business nuance. It's not based on his ability to, market well or grow the business or grow the nonprofit or whatever the case may be, right? So it is character focused and it's character driven. And what we look for as leaders for the church, it is a completely different characteristic or litmus test than what we look for in a business or a nonprofit, right? And the reason why you run into some dangers, and this is a very important and a serious danger, is that these elders that are being established in these churches have the character to hold the office of an overseer. And these board members, well, we really do not know if these board members have that, have the character and are qualified to oversee a local church, right? All right, so this leads to the third hidden danger of parachurch ministries planting churches. So when they have a founder syndrome, it can lead to not having a biblical accountability, which then leads to and most likely will produce some form of spiritual abuse. So the third hidden danger of a parachurch ministry planting a local church is the spiritual abuse that will come because of it. Now, I'm not saying that a parachurch ministry, if they plant a church, they're creating spiritual abuse for others. However, it is likely that when you don't have spirit-filled, biblically qualified elders in place, then you run the risk of there not being any shepherds who are going to be protecting and discipling the flock. And the question that needs to be asked is, who is shepherding the shepherd? So if we have a founder who established this nonprofit, and now this nonprofit or this parachurch ministry is now being ran by the same founder, and the founder is overseeing both the parachurch ministry and he's overseeing the local church, and who is shepherding that founder? Who is shepherding that shepherd? Where is the accountability coming from? What I am saying is that without a team of elders, there is no checks and balances on the decisions that are being made by that founder. And this can lead to unintentionally. The founder is not trying to hurt people. He is not trying to abuse people. But there's a reason why why the design that God has for his church is for there to be a plurality of elders, right? We all have blind spots, right? So he's not doing this intentionally. Let's give this founder the benefit of the doubt. But we all have a sinful nature. We all have blind spots, right? So without a team of elders that are able to shepherd the shepherd and are able to hold him accountable, and there's no checks and balances on the decisions that he is making, it can and most likely will lead to some level of spiritual abuse. Now, I want to give you guys a specific real life example of what this looks like. Now, we have the story, which, unless you guys, depending on who's watching this video, unless you guys are living on a rock, this is something that has been known for and has been on the news for the last couple of years, but it's the story of IHOP. Now, the story of IHOP, if you remember, it was founded by Mike Bickle, and Mike Bickle founded IHOP, International House of Prayer, as a parachurch ministry late in the 1990s. So IHOP was founded based on this 24/7 worship and harp and cymbal prayer movement, where there was 24/7 worship and prayer, and it was connected to all these prophecies given by Paul Cain and Bob Jones. And we see a parachurch ministry that come to find out in 2023 now has allegations, incredible allegations, of the spiritual abuse and the SA that happened under the hands of Mike Bickle. I think the problem is that you have somebody like a Mike Bickle who is a predator and is not a Christian and is a false prophet, and he is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and he molested and groomed all these women for decades, is that he established a parachurch ministry called IHOP, and through this parachurch ministry, he then planted a local church called Forerunner Church. And the problem that allowed all this spiritual and SA abuse to happen, the environment, part of that was the structure of the church. We have the founder, being Mike Bickle, not being biblically held accountable, because the way that the church was structured was a board of leaders called the ELT, Executive Leadership Team, I think it was called. But we had this ELT, and they basically had the founder syndrome, and they were not able to hold the founder, Mike Bickle, accountable. And Mike Bickle oversaw the parachurch and oversaw the local church. So there was no real accountability. There was no shepherds who were shepherding the shepherd. There was no shepherd that was holding Mike Bickle accountable. It was, part of it was the structure. Part of it was, even within the structure, the parachurch ministry was connected to the Forerunner Church, and they were not autonomous. Now, sadly, the point of bringing up IHOP is that this environment facilitated and allowed for horrendous, disgusting SA abuse of many victims that Mike Bickle groomed for decades. And it allowed for an environment for there to be no biblical accountability. And the local church, the Forerunner Church, and the team, the ELT that was overseeing that, they were under Mike Bickle, and they had founder syndrome. There was no biblical accountability. These shepherds were not able to hold the shepherd, the CEO, the founder, Mike Bickle, accountable. They were too close, and he was able, given the structure, he was able to control the narrative through manipulation, through all the allegations that were brought up. He was able to minimize them. He was able to disregard them. He was able to manipulate and control the narrative of all these allegations. And that's how he was able to stay in power and stay in a position, unfortunately, to continue to these women. Part of this is because of the structure of the parachurch ministry and the local church. One of the reasons why this happened is because we allowed a parachurch ministry to start a local church without a proper biblical design that God says in Scripture that is the way that we should structure the church. And there is no plurality of elders in place. There is no proper biblical accountability in place. And it allowed for this horrendous abuse to happen. So when I say at the beginning of the video that this is not about leadership style, but this is about protecting God's people, this is about safeguarding against spiritual abuse. Now, this is an extreme case, and I'm not saying that every parachurch ministry or every founder is a Mike Bickle. I'm not saying that at all. That situation is extreme and maybe an outlier. But I think there are things that we can take from that and learn and grow from so that this does not happen again. All right, the fourth hidden danger of parachurch ministry planting a local church is building growth without depth. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, Jesus in Matthew 28, he tells his apostles to go and make disciples, to go teach them everything that I have taught you. Right? So we have a commission, we have the Great Commission to go and make disciples. Now, parachurch ministries can be hyper-focused and run alongside the local church to help that Great Commission of making disciples to all nations. I think the problem is that parachurch ministries function as they're event driven, and they function in a way that true, authentic discipleship is not really going to be flushed out. The true discipleship is supposed to happen within the context of the local church. Whenever we have a parachurch ministry trying to compete with discipleship, then a parachurch ministry is no longer functioning in a biblical manner. So discipleship is supposed to happen within the context of the local church, and a parachurch ministry has a purpose and has a role, but it is not to make and create disciples in competition with the local church. I think the heart of Jesus and the heart of the Christian message, whenever you come to faith, is that we are supposed to be making disciples. And I have experienced personally, and I have seen this, that there are churches who, and I think the parent ministry world, really this is a danger. There are churches that are driven more by events-based. They are events-based. The way that they function is from one event to another event, and they are promoting the events, and it's all about that specific event and that specific service. And I think there's rapid growth, but we lose the depth, the spiritual depth that Christians are supposed to have. And that comes from real day-to-day authentic relationships that are built through discipleship in the local church. So I'm not saying that every parachurch ministry will lead to having shallow Christians. What I am saying is that the discipleship of Christians is supposed to happen within the context of the local church. And the parachurch ministry needs to run alongside that and facilitate the church in that, but cannot replace the church in creating and making disciples. All right, and this leads to my last hidden danger, and it flows from the previous one, and that is something called mission drift. Now, parachurch ministries are hyper-focused on a specific part, usually of, the Great Commission, or, the teachings of Jesus, or a specific aspect of the church. So when it comes to mission drift, we need to make sure, and one of the dangers of a parachurch ministry, planting a local church, is that we make the mission of the parachurch ministry, whether that's an evangelistic mission, whether that's a discipleship mission, whether that's more of a social justice, social work mission, good works, whatever focus that parachurch ministry has, we run the danger of replacing that mission with the mission of the church. And the mission of the church, obviously, part of that is to evangelize and part of that is to make disciples. We're not supposed to choose. We should have both within the context of the local church. But what I'm saying is that we need to make sure that the identity of the parachurch ministry does not overrule or overwhelm the identity and the role and the purpose of the local church. And that's a danger, and there's a little bit of tension there. And the role and the function of the local church is to create disciples, right? Is to help Christians grow in their faith and their walk with God. Is for Christ to be preached, for it to be gospel-centered, for people to come to the knowledge of who He is and grow in sanctification in their walk with God. All of that happens within the context of believers gathering together in the local assembly. All right, so we discussed the 5 hidden dangers. What is the solution? So I alluded to this earlier. The answer is that this parachurch ministry should have in place spirit-filled, biblically qualified elders. And these elders need to have the authority and the office and the function of overseers, which means that the founder of the nonprofit or the founder of the parachurch ministry is no longer the person in charge. He is no longer the person running the church, but he is coming alongside other biblically qualified elders, if he is a biblically qualified elder as well, running alongside these elders, and they together are overseeing the local church, but the local church is autonomous. The local church is separate from the influence of the parachurch ministry. So if a parachurch ministry feels led to plant a local church, I think that in itself is not sinful. It's not a problem. I think that in itself is not the issue. The issue of this video is that when a parachurch ministry plants a church without biblical accountability, allowing the founder to run the local church, and there not being a plurality of elders, I think that is the problem. So the priority of a parachurch ministry should first be to raise up elders and to establish a church that is autonomous and that it is separate from its nonprofit or parachurch ministry. So you guys let me know what you guys think. If you guys disagree, have you guys seen, I did not mention any below. I am sure there are. If you guys have any good examples of any parachurch ministries that planted local churches and did it the right way, please comment down below and let me know. If you guys disagree or if there's anything you guys want to add to this conversation, please go ahead and comment down below as well. If you guys want more content like this, if you guys enjoyed, please subscribe and share this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Let's go.